Okay, so my name is Shangzhe Wu. I also go by Elliot. I finished my PhD at the other university, and I'm currently doing a postdoc at Stanford. So today I'll be discussing a line of research I've been working on over the past several years with the ultimate goal of recreating the physical natural world from images. We live in this dynamic world, right? Surrounded by all kinds of dynamic objects that bring us a sense of life. And vision is arguably the most effective way of understanding this environment around us. It's a fundamental capability that's shared across all these different kinds of intelligent creatures. And it's because it's such an important sensory modality, now we have all these different kinds of cameras that are almost everywhere, recording every corner of the world. Okay, so with this enormous amount of visual data being collected constantly, one central question in computer vision is how can we use this enormous amount of data to build models that can automatically understand the world and potentially create digital copies of it. So in this talk specifically, I'll be focusing on this problem of using this amount of data to learn physical representations of these objects, including their 3D shape, surface material, motion, etc. And these representations are going to be useful in many downstream AI applications, like controllable content creation for the entertainment industries when we want to automate like content creation for game designs or movie productions. And today we're going to use this approach that learns these physical representations from these images alone without ever having to collect these physical measurements directly using any sensors. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to introduce this inverse rendering framework that essentially decomposes images into these physical factors, including also the image formation parameters like lighting and camera pose. And with these disentangled representations, we can then use a graphics renderer to like render the images so that train this entire pipeline by just comparing the render pixels with the input images. And this entire pipeline is fully differentiable, so we can train it with the image reconstruction losses without any explicit supervision on or collecting on any of these physical measurements. Now, let me give you a more concrete example. So let's say we want to learn this model that can reconstruct the 3D shapes of these this category of objects. And it can be these cat faces or human faces, animals, or any other objects which I will demonstrate later. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by searching the internet for images of this category, download a bunch of them, and use an automatic object detector to segment these images, crop these images around the objects of interest. But first of all, we're not gonna rely on any predefined shape models of these objects. That's used in many prior works, because all these, including these face models or human body models, they're usually obtained using these like very expensive 3D scanners or like handcrafted by 3D designers, which is not a scalable approach if you want to model all kinds of objects in nature. So in all of the work I'll be presenting today, we're not going to use any of these predefined models, and we're just going to learn these 3D shapes from these raw images from scratch. So how do we do this? We know how multi-view geometry works. So if you have multiple images of a static scene taken from different viewpoints, you would be able to find correspondences between these images and use epipolar geometry to reconstruct the 3D surface of this underlying 3D scene. But here the tricky part is these are not multi-view images of the same static objects. There are single view images of different objects, different instances, and in different shapes. So we can't directly apply this multi-view geometry on these images. But here's the key motivation. Although there are different instances, they all belong to the same object category, which means they're supposed to share a lot of structural similarity in terms of their 3D shapes. So if we can find a way to explain away these variations in each image, we can still register them in a canonical 3D space and explore the underlying multi-view signals in a statistical sense across different instances. So this allows us to reconstruct the underlying 3D shape of this object category without relying on any like explicit multi-view images of the same object. And this is exactly why we need a learning-based approach to do this, like to aggregate all these signals in these different images. So we train this model with a bunch of networks that takes an image. Now we're switching from cat faces to human faces, but this is just an illustration. The model works on either both of these objects. And this model takes this input image and decomposes it into these camera viewpoint, lighting, a depth map, which represent the surface geometry of this object, and an albedo, which represent the intrinsic appearance of this object. And then we use this differential renderer to reconstruct the input image and train this entire model pipeline using only image reconstruction loss. Now, as you can imagine, this is a highly ill-posed problem to disentangle all these different components from this 2D image, which is a partial observation of the object, right? And in order to help the model to achieve this optimal decomposition, we're going to inject some generic and minimal inductive biases into this pipeline to exploit the underlying structures in nature that will help the model to figure out these internal representations. So here's the first idea. We know that many objects in nature are actually symmetric, like these faces. So we give this small hint to the model making the smallest change in this pipeline, simply just flipping the predictions of the depth and albedo randomly at training. Now, what this simple trick does are two things. One is it forces the prediction to be invariant to this flipping operation. So they have to be symmetric. Now, this is actually equivalent to if you flip the input image to get a second virtual view of the object first, and then just run stereogeometry on it. So this insight actually dates back to the 90s when before the deep learning era. But now what we are doing is essentially training this model to learn this stereogeometry automatically without detecting explicitly the correspondences. Now, the second effect of this flipping operation is that now this symmetric viewpoint here defines the canonical space that registers all different kinds of images. And this allows us to exploit the underlying multi-view signals across different images. So the model would automatically figure out decompose the 3D shape and pose of this object automatically. And of course, the no face is perfectly symmetric. So this model also learns a canonical confidence map that tells you which part of the image is not symmetric, and it can automatically discount these non-symmetric parts in the model during the training. So after training, this model can then reconstruct these detailed 3D meshes of this image from just a single 2D image. And here what we are showing is the texture 3D mesh and the normal surface normals as well as the mesh itself. And this model also generalizes well to all these like paintings and abstract drawings of faces, despite being trained on real faces only. So we can also train this model on those cat faces that we started with. And now we can reconstruct all these cats in 3D using just a single 2D image. And this simple idea was published in CivicPR 2020, and it won the Best Paper Award. And we can extend this idea to model a different type of symmetry, like this rotational symmetry. And now we can recover not only the 3D shape of this object, but also the surface materials of these vases, like how shiny or rough they are. And this would allow us to relight and render these vases in 3D under different lighting conditions. So if we want to place these objects in various virtual environments, you would need to. This is crucial to model the appearance of these objects. Okay, so far we've been making a very strong assumption on the shape of these objects, which is symmetric, right? And next we're going to relax this assumption by looking at deformable objects. So what about these full body shapes of these animals? They can deform into different shapes, into different poses, which would like break this bilateral symmetry assumption. So if we still want to register these different images onto a canonical 3D space, we would now need to be able to figure out their fine-grained correspondences between these different instances. And what we found was that such fine-grained like semantic correspondences can already be extracted from these unsupervised image features with the modern self-supervised learning. So essentially, if you feed each of these images into this model called Dino and extract the image features, and then just simply run principal component analysis on these extracted image features, what you can get is all these colorful images on the right. What it's indicating is that, you can see now all the heads are now highlighted in blue purplish color, all the bodies are yellowish, and all the legs are green. Now, visually, these correspondences can already tell you the different poses of different instances. So if we can extract these pose variations into an explicit pose representation, what remains essentially is this canonical 3D shape of this object category, which is in this case is the template shape of this horse. So this is the second key idea, is essentially to extract, to leverage the underlying hierarchical structures in nature by learning one canonical 3D shape first, and then deforming this canonical 3D shape to match the individual instances that we observe in the image. So in practice, what we would do is we can optimize the canonical 3D shape of this object category and by optimizing a 3D mesh and as well as the feature field. And we are going to assume we know the topology of this deformable objects, like in this case, it's a quadruped. So using a very simple heuristic, you would be able to, the model would be able to find the locations of the underlying skeleton. And we can use this to deform the objects to match the target pose. And on the right here is a feature field, which will render later to match extracted image features for registration purposes. So these are initialized as ellipsoids, right? And as the training proceeds, it will gradually morph into the shape of an actual horse. And now, given an image of a specific horse instance, we're going to deform this canonical 3D mesh by first predicting a deformation field, and then an articulated pose that based on the coarse estimation of the underlying bone skeleton. And the model also predicts albedo, camera viewpoint, and lighting as usual, similar to the previous model, so that we can train this pipeline using just image reconstruction losses. In this case, it's going to be the pixel reconstruction losses of the image features, the RGB pixels, as well as the object mass, which in this case, we can obtain the pseudo ground truth object mass from off-the-shelf segmentation models. And this entire pipeline is trained end-to-end without any predefined shape models or relying on any key point or viewpoint annotations from just those images that I started with. So after training, the model, again, predicts these highly detailed deformable 3D meshes of this objects from just a single 2D image in a feed-forward fashion within just a second. And because it also estimates the underlying bone skeleton, you can now start animating these animals and render these 3D animations instantly. But this is not the end of the story, right? We're training this model on one single category. In this case, it's just a bunch of horses, and it works on horses. But we want to model all kinds of objects in nature, right? Including all kinds of different 3D animals that would have different shapes. So we extend this idea to model all kinds of different animal species using one single model without focusing on one particular object categories. So if we were to take the previous category-specific approach to model all these different animals, what we would need to do is we would need to learn a large collection of these category-specific canonical shapes, which is very inefficient, right? It's we know that a lot of these animals actually share a lot of similarities in terms of their underlying structure as a result of evolution. So naturally, we would want to leverage this knowledge to improve the statistical efficiency when we're training this model. So how can we do this? We can extend our previous hierarchy and construct a shape basis that would be able to model all different kinds of 3D animals. And this is implemented using a small memory bank with a bunch of basis vectors. And these basis vectors can be remixed to produce the animal shapes of different animal species. And crucially, this pipeline is trained in a category agnostic manner, which means it doesn't have to know whether the input image is a horse or a cat. Just given an image of any 3D animal, it will automatically extract the latent feature vector of this image. And then we can use this latent vector to compare the memory bank and automatically produce the canonical 3D shape of this animal. Now, besides training efficiency, what's even more important to have this shape basis is that now we can propagate learning signals from like more common animal species to rare species, in which case we often only have very limited data to train well individually. So this entire pipeline is trained in a very similar fashion, so I won't go into more details. But what we end up having is this one single model that can turn these 2D photos into these highly realistic 3D meshes and compose these 3D assets into a scene and render them from multiple any viewpoints or also under different lighting conditions. And again, the model estimates the underlying bone skeleton, so we can now start animating these animals and generate these 3D animations instantly with this feed-forward model. And we can use these assets in like VR games or movies automatically. And since this model aligns all the different animal species in one canonical 3D space, right? You can now start generating these smooth interpolations from one animal to another. For example, from this armored animal on the top left, which is called an armadillo, to this horse, and then to the bottom, this spaniel dog. Or we can directly sample from this learned latent space to generate different kinds of different animals instantly in a feed-forward manner. And we built this online demo, which you can just upload a 2D photo of your favorite animal, and within just a few seconds, you can now like download the 3D mesh of your animal and play around with it in any 3D software. Or why not just like 3D print it and bring it back to real life? This is a 3D reconstruction of this horse image at the bottom left here. So this is one line of research I've been working on since the beginning of my PhD in 2018, basically to learn these dynamic 3D shapes of these animals or in general, all kinds of objects with an unsupervised approach from just raw images alone. Now, another line of our work which I briefly mentioned, is to recover not only the 3D shape, but also the intrinsic materials of these objects, like how shiny or rough these objects are, so that we can render them not only from any like viewpoint, but also under different lighting conditions, which are crucial when we want to place these objects in virtual 3D environments. So this is the research agenda I've been pursuing. It's essentially to enable machines to see the world through the lens of physics, but learning from just raw image observations without ever having to collect any of these physical measurements. And to achieve this, I've introduced 3 inductive biases, which are generic, and you can use it in various scenarios to exploit the underlying structure in nature, like symmetry, hierarchical structures, and this low-rank basis. Now, I've introduced what this work is about. Next, I'm going to address 2 important questions. Why are we doing this? First, why are we learning these physical representations, especially in this age of large foundation models? Do we ever need these physical representations at all? Here's my argument. I think the most and straight, direct application of these physical representations, it allows you to do controllable content generation. To ensure these physical representations would ensure your generated content is physically realistic and controllable through these physical handles. And I think what's more important is this language of physics connects computer vision to a much broader engineering discipline, so that, for example, you want to design autonomous robots that can operate safely in this physical environment, these physical representations will ensure your actions are feasible and verifiable through these explicit representations. And I also believe like many scientific domains would also require these benefit from these representations, like for interpretability or like, for example, if you want to study the behaviors of different animals or reconstruct these 3D molecular structures using these techniques like cryo-EM and for drug discovery purposes. So the next question I'm going to address is, why are we using images? Why are we not using any explicit sensors? This has been the approach we've been taken in the past decade. For example, one approach, the alternative approach is to directly using these sensors to put markers on these animals and track them as they move, right? Or to build these performance capture domes with hundreds of cameras, which is expensive. You want to capture like different types of objects, including these wildlife animals. But this is, in fact, the approach we've been using to collect these 3D shapes and human motions of like human bodies in the past decade. This particular model called Simple was collected by Michael Black, and it has been the main driver of the entire decade of research in human motion modeling. But this process is expensive and it's tedious, and it's infeasible to scale this approach to model all kinds of objects in nature, including these like wildlife. So whereas like images are much cheaper to obtain, and we can like collect a lot of data, so it's much more scalable to model all kinds of objects. Now, we've made decent progress on this in learning these like physical representations from images. But next, there are still many other like physical properties we can continue to recover using this inverse rendering approach. One particular direction that I find super exciting is to start modeling these 4D physical dynamics instead of looking at the object from one single snapshot of a 3D of the 3D model. We want to understand how these physical objects will move and deform over time to model their underlying 3D motions. And we should probably also incorporate like more physical constraints into these models, like learning or using or learning these like underlying biomechanics of these animals to capture the true underlying motions of these animals. Now, another exciting direction is to model other physical modalities, such as 3D spatial audio, and which I believe is like crucial to our immersive understanding of a 3D environment. So we've recently applied this inverse rendering approach to model these like 3D spatial audio, and developed this method that can just take 12 microphone measurements of a 3D environment. And you can, with these 12 microphone measurements, you can recover the spatial acoustic properties of any room so that you can synthesize any audio that would hear at any location within a room by virtually walking through the scene. And next, we hope to turn this audio inverse rendering framework to a learning-based framework so that we can directly learn to generate these immersive spatial audio experiences by learning just from YouTube videos. And besides creating these immersive virtual worlds, I think I'm also like extremely excited about like using these models to like in various life science domains, like analyzing the behaviors of these animals or social interactions of these animals through these explicit physical representations, and especially with a non-invasive approach of using just cameras. And recently, I'm also part of this big collaboration with a bunch of marine biologists at Stanford and many other institutions around the world. We're basically fitting 3D models of dolphins. Actually, Andrew did a fantastic work on this dolphins 20 years ago, probably. And we're fitting these models of 3D models of dolphins to a bunch of video footage of these animals to model their hydrodynamics and their swimming energetics for health monitoring purposes and for the conservation of these species. So to summarize, the ultimate goal of my research is to ultimately reverse engineer this like physical natural world, to create technologies that can blend seamlessly into our lives, and to build these computational tools that we can use to unravel the mystery of nature. And finally, I'd like to end my talk with this beautiful quote from Hilma af Klint, which I found at Tate Modern. Those granted the gift of seeing more deeply can see beyond form and concentrate on the wondrous aspect hiding behind every form, which is called life. And I'd like to thank all of my amazing collaborators and mentors, and happy to take any questions now.